Flight 7A had been cruising steadily at 35,000 feet for nearly 3 hours, the soft hum of the engines and the occasional clatter of service carts forming the usual backdrop of a long-haul flight. Outside, the sky was a deep indigo, speckled with distant stars, and the moon cast a silvery glow across the clouds, making the night feel calm and almost serene. Inside, passengers were settling in, some flipping through in-flight magazines, others dozing with blankets draped over their shoulders. A few watched movies on the tiny screens embedded in the seatbacks ahead of them, while the low murmur of conversation and laughter filled the cabin sporadically. Among the passengers, most were completely unaware that in just a few moments, their entire world would tilt quite literally into chaos. The crew moved efficiently, checking seatbelts, scanning aisles, and ensuring drinks were properly distributed, performing their roles with that practiced, professional ease that passengers generally take for granted. Then it happened. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, and then dimmed to a low, almost ominous pulse before returning to normal. A few passengers glanced around nervously, attributing it to a routine power fluctuation, but the pilots in the cockpit immediately sensed something more serious. Moments later, a sharp jolt ran through the fuselage, a violent gut-churning shake that sent a few items tumbling off carts and rattled the overhead compartments. The sudden shock made people gasp and clutch their armrests instinctively. The alarms went off in an ear-splitting cacophony, warning lights flashing red across the cockpit instruments, a shrill mechanical scream filling the air, and the unmistakable vibration of fuselage as the aircraft rocked slightly. Panic began to creep into the cabin, the way it does when people realize the thin veneer of safety has been shattered. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into prayers. Parents hugged children tightly, couples held hands with a mix of fear and reassurance, strangers glanced at each other with wide eyes, all searching for some sign that everything would be okay. The captain's voice finally cut through the chaos, calm yet authoritative, designed to command attention and impose order. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've lost hydraulic pressure. Stand by for further instructions." His words were carefully measured, but they carried the weight of gravity that every passenger could feel in their chest. Gasps filled the cabin as people realized the severity of the situation. Some closed their eyes and murmured prayers under their breath. Others gripped armrests so tightly that knuckles turned white, trying to convince themselves that this was just another minor technical glitch. Among them sat one individual who seemed almost invisible amidst the rising tide of fear. A woman in a gray hoodie, the hood pulled up over her head, headphones snugly over her ears. She was absorbed in her own thoughts, seemingly disconnected from the world, scrolling idly through her phone. But there was a difference in her demeanor, a calmness that contrasted sharply with the tension around her, a quiet awareness that she knew more about this situation than anyone else in the cabin. Suddenly the captain's voice boomed again, now sharper, more urgent, reverberating through the cabin intercom. "We need anyone with aviation experience. Please come forward immediately." The words rang through the cabin like a bell, causing a ripple of stunned silence. Passengers froze, some in disbelief, others out of sheer panic. Hands twitched at the seatbelt clasps, a few people shuffled uncomfortably, but no one moved. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily in the air. The reality was stark. The aircraft was in trouble, the hydraulics were failing, and unless someone stepped forward, the fate of the flight could be catastrophic. There was a collective hesitation, the human instinct to wait for someone else to act, a paralyzing fear that silenced most. For several tense seconds, the cabin seemed to hold its breath, the ambient noise of shuffling, nervous whispers, and a few muffled cries creating a surreal soundtrack to what was unfolding. Then, as if in slow motion, one figure rose from her seat. Passenger 91, the quiet woman with the gray hoodie and headphones, moved with precision and confidence that seemed almost military in nature. Her movements were calm, measured, and deliberate, betraying no hint of fear despite the magnitude of the emergency around her. Eyes turned toward her, some incredulous, some relieved, as she walked determinedly toward the cockpit. Passengers whispered amongst themselves, questions laced with awe and anxiety. Who is she? Did she know the captain? Is she trained? Yet she ignored the attention, focused solely on the task at hand. There was a subtle but undeniable aura of authority about her, a presence that seemed to command respect without a word. Her steps were purposeful, and in that instant it became painfully clear that she was no ordinary passenger. She carried the weight of experience, skill, and courage that could very well mean the difference between life and death for everyone on board. As she reached the cockpit door, the co-pilot's head turned toward her, disbelief etched across his face. The intercom crackled with the captain's voice once more, tense but laced with hope. Anyone who can help, now's the time, eh? And just like that, the dynamic of the flight shifted. In the midst of fear, uncertainty, and impending disaster, one individual had emerged, not as a frightened passenger, but as a potential savior. In her calm and measured approach, she carried not only her knowledge, but the unspoken reassurance that, despite the odds, there was still a chance. While everyone else had frozen, immobilized by terror, she had risen to action. Passenger 91 had become the pivot around which the fate of Flight 7A now turned, and in that moment the quiet woman with the hoodie was no longer just another face in the cabin, she was the only hope. She walked into the cockpit with a calmness that was almost unnatural, each step measured, deliberate, as if the chaos outside the small glass enclosure didn't exist. The hum of the failing aircraft thrummed beneath her feet, and the muted warning alarms echoed in her ears, but she did not flinch. The co-pilot, pale and wide-eyed, stared at her as she approached, his hands hovering over the instruments, unsure if he should reach for the controls or step aside. "Name?" he asked, his voice tight with disbelief, betraying the fear and astonishment that gripped him. She did not hesitate, her tone low, steady, and utterly confident. "Call sign Falcon 91. Former Air Force test pilot." The words cut through the cockpit tension like a blade, and the captain froze, his knuckles tightening on the yoke as his eyes widened. For a moment neither man could speak, caught between the disbelief that a random passenger could claim such credentials and the faint glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, their situation wasn't entirely hopeless. Falcon 91's eyes scanned the instruments with a practiced intensity, taking in every blinking light, every pressure gauge, every warning signal that screamed danger. Her fingers hovered above the controls, knowing instinctively which systems to prioritize, which to bypass, and how to compensate for the hydraulic failure that had thrown the plane's critical systems into chaos. The cockpit, usually a place of collaborative teamwork, became a stage where her expertise alone would determine the survival of everyone on board. She spoke again, calm but authoritative. "Hydraulics are gone. We'll have to land manual and fast." The weight of those words sank like a stone into the co-pilot's chest. His mind, racing through all the scenarios he had trained for, couldn't reconcile the reality of what she was saying. To land a commercial aircraft manually without hydraulics was nearly impossible, an act most pilots never survived. His voice, barely above a whisper, trembled as he muttered, "No one survives that." He didn't say it out of despair alone, but from the deep, gnawing knowledge of how rarely such a maneuver ended in success. He turned to her, eyes pleading, searching for some indication that she might be wrong, that he might still find a shred of safety in the chaos. Falcon 91's gaze met his, unwavering, determined, filled with a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate through the room. There was no panic in her eyes, no hesitation, only a clear, unshakable resolve. "We don't have a choice," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of command, and in that instant the dynamic in the cockpit shifted. She did not just take control, she became the pivot on which the fate of Flight 7A now balanced. The co-pilot's hands shook slightly, but slowly he began to mirror her focus, letting her authority guide him. Instruments that had seemed incomprehensible in the midst of the failure suddenly began to make sense as her hands danced across the controls with precision. Each adjustment she made was deliberate, informed by years of experience testing aircraft under extreme conditions. She ran mental calculations at a speed that made the co-pilot dizzy, anticipating how the plane would react to every input, every gust of wind, every uneven pressure in the hydraulic lines. Outside, the world remained oblivious to the struggle within the cockpit, a vast expanse of night sky, stars sparkling like distant eyes watching the drama unfold, clouds drifting silently past. Inside, tension had a tangible weight, pressing down on every shoulder, every nerve. Passengers miles above were unaware of how close they were to disaster, unaware that survival now depended on the precision and courage of one woman who had never intended to be a hero that night. Falcon 91 ran her hands along the yoke, feeling the subtle vibrations, listening to the faint sounds of struggling engines and warning alarms. She barked instructions to the co-pilot, who mirrored her actions under her guidance, hands shaking but following her lead, adjusting throttles, balancing weight, compensating for failures. Every decision she made was a calculated risk, measured against the lives of hundreds of people who had placed their trust unknowingly in her hands. The captain, still recovering from shock, observed her work, his own training kicking in as he supported her, monitoring readings and communicating with air traffic control. The coordination between the three of them became a delicate dance, each movement precise, each command exact, as if the cockpit itself had transformed into a battlefield where every second counted, and any mistake could be fatal. Falcon 91's mind was a blur of calculations, simulations, and tactical maneuvers, honed over years of test flights in aircraft that pushed the boundaries of speed, altitude, and danger. Yet despite the complexity of the situation, she maintained an almost serene composure, radiating an aura that grounded the co-pilot and reassured the captain. She issued commands with clarity, guiding them through procedures that few had ever attempted outside of simulations, translating her expertise into actionable steps that could be followed under extreme pressure. She monitored every dial, every switch, every indicator, correcting and compensating instantly for the failing systems, predicting how the aircraft would respond and adjusting her approach with split-second timing. The gravity of the situation never left her mind, but fear had no place in her decision-making. There was only action, precision, and control. Outside, clouds streaked past the windows, illuminated intermittently by the flashes of distant lightning in the far-off horizon, a reminder of the world beyond the cockpit that could not intervene in the fight for survival within. Passengers remained unaware, clutching seatbelts, whispering prayers, their lives hanging in the balance as a woman they barely noticed had taken control of their fate. Every second stretched into eternity as Falcon 91 orchestrated her maneuvers, balancing physics, aerodynamics, and human lives in a way that few could even comprehend. The co-pilot, slowly finding his rhythm under her guidance, whispered reassurances to himself, his voice shaking but growing steadier as her confidence became contagious. The captain, no longer in disbelief, leaned into her expertise, trusting her to navigate the impossible. In those moments, the cockpit became a sanctuary of focus amidst chaos, a place where fear was transformed into action and uncertainty was countered by skill. She was no longer passenger 91, she had become the fulcrum of hope, the embodiment of courage, and the living proof that experience and composure could defy the odds. The hours, minutes, or seconds stretching out in that cockpit were meaningless. What mattered was the precision, the clarity, and the absolute dedication to survival. And as she prepared to execute maneuvers that most pilots only dreamed of surviving, the co-pilot and captain knew, with a mixture of awe and relief, that they were in the hands of someone extraordinary, someone whose calm, deliberate presence had become the only guarantee that Flight 7A might live to see another sunrise. As Falcon 91 fought to keep Flight 7A level, the aircraft trembling beneath her hands like a wild animal, the world outside the cockpit seemed almost surreal, a mixture of chaos and beauty, intertwined in the night sky. The engines groaned, metal creaked, and the alarm lights blinked incessantly, yet she remained calm, methodically adjusting throttles, yokes, and trim, her eyes scanning the array of instruments. With laser focus, the co-pilot mirrored her actions, shaking but precise under her guidance, while the captain monitored the dwindling hydraulic systems, silently praying for a miracle. Suddenly, the crisp voice of air traffic control cut through the tension like a lifeline. Unknown aircraft losing altitude, F-22s dispatched to escort. Falcon 91's ears registered the words, but she did not flinch. She had flown with fighter squadrons before, had coordinated with jets in maneuvers that pushed the limits of physics and human endurance. Yet this was different. This was a commercial aircraft, hundreds of lives at stake. The stakes multiplied 1,000-fold, yet the precision required was the same, perfect, calculated, unwavering. She adjusted the controls, countering the subtle roll of the fuselage, feeling the plane's response as if it were an extension of her own body. Outside, the night sky was vast, dark, and punctuated with distant stars, yet suddenly, two bright streaks appeared on the horizon, sleek, angular silhouettes moving with astonishing speed. The roar of the F-22 engines reached the cockpit, a low, thrilling growl that vibrated through the floor, through the metal frame of the plane, a visceral reminder of the raw power now flanking them. The fighter jets closed the distance with breathtaking precision, their aerodynamic shapes cutting through the night air effortlessly, moving as if choreographed in a deadly ballet. The co-pilot's eyes widened as he watched the jets align perfectly with the commercial airliner, formation-tight, disciplined, the kind of coordination that only the most elite pilots could achieve. The F-22 commander's voice came through the radio, calm but authoritative, carrying the weight of military discipline. Identify yourself. The question, simple in structure, carried enormous significance. An unknown aircraft, descending rapidly, could be a threat, a malfunctioning vessel, or worse. Seconds stretched endlessly in the cockpit as Falcon 91's mind raced, simultaneously calculating the trajectory, assessing the aircraft's responses, monitoring the failing hydraulics, and maintaining calm control over the terrified crew. Then she pressed the mic with deliberate authority, her voice steady, unwavering. "This is Falcon 91. I'm taking her home." The words, spoken so simply, carried the weight of her experience, her years of service, and an unspoken assurance that she was in control. For a heartbeat there was silence on the line, a pause thick with anticipation, the kind of tense lull that precedes the resolution of disaster. Outside, the F-22 pilots seemed to hesitate, their aircraft hovering in formation, wings angled slightly as if considering the identity of the woman before them. Then, with perfect synchronization, the two fighter jets snapped into position alongside the airliner, engines roaring with barely contained power, wings dipping in a precise salute, a gesture both ceremonial and tactical, a blend of respect and recognition. In that instant, the cockpit of Flight 7A felt like a nexus between ordinary life and extraordinary heroism. The co-pilot exhaled, almost without realizing it, as the display of trust and recognition from the F-22 pilots settled in his mind. The captain, though still tense, allowed himself the briefest glimmer of hope, witnessing the flawless discipline and power of the escort jets, a tangible symbol of support from the most elite aviators in the world. Falcon 91, however, did not allow herself to be distracted by the symbolism. Her focus remained entirely on the aircraft in her hands. She could feel every fluctuation in the plane's response, every imperfection in the airflow, every subtle shift in balance caused by the failing hydraulics. Yet, with the F-22s flanking them, she found a strange reassurance. They were silent partners, guardians in the sky, their presence a reminder that while she bore the weight of responsibility, she was not alone in the fight. She adjusted the yoke slightly, compensating for turbulence, feeling the plane respond as if alive, a living extension of her experience, her instincts honed over years of test flights and combat simulations. The F-22 pilots, highly trained to recognize skill and competence instantly, did not just see a passenger, they recognized a peer, a fellow aviator with the calm, precise demeanor that marked the difference between survival and catastrophe. Every minor correction Falcon 91 made, every nuanced adjustment to maintain altitude and course, confirmed their assessment. She was someone who understood the language of flight, the physics of controlled chaos, the art of saving a vessel under impossible conditions. Their wings dipped again, an unspoken salute, their alignment flawless, a visual reassurance that they trusted her judgment implicitly. The sight of these fighter jets, moving with such exacting grace and deadly efficiency, bolstered her confidence, not because she needed validation, but because she understood the immense psychological weight their presence carried. Below the cockpit, the passengers were oblivious to the silent ballet of skill and respect unfolding just outside the window. They could only feel the subtle shifts in the aircraft, the occasional tremor, the tension in the air, unaware that above them, elite fighter pilots had recognized and validated the authority of very women holding their lives in balance. Falcon 91's hands moved with precision, almost a blur over the controls, counteracting each micro tilt, each sudden drop of pressure, calculating in milliseconds the plane's response to every input. Her voice, calm and authoritative, guided the co-pilot through adjustments, her words brief but perfectly clear. Trim slightly to the left 3 degrees, compensate for yaw now, watch for stall, adjust throttle incrementally. Each instruction was met with trembling obedience, each response precise, as the aircraft's descent became manageable, not safe but survivable. Outside, the F-22s mirrored her movements in formation, their presence both symbolic and functional, a testament to trust earned instantly by skill demonstrated under pressure. She could feel their awareness, their evaluation of her every move, but she neither faltered nor rushed, understanding that precision and calm were paramount. The seconds stretched into minutes, each heartbeat echoing like a drum of anticipation and dread, every breath measured, every adjustment critical. The cockpit became a microcosm of controlled tension, the interplay of human skill, mechanical limitation, and elite support from above creating a delicate balance between chaos and order. Even as the plane continued its precarious descent, the knowledge that she had the F-22 pilots by her side, acknowledging her authority, recognizing her skill, and implicitly trusting her judgment, infused her with an unshakable determination. She was no longer a mere passenger. She had become the command center, the linchpin of Flight 7A's survival. Every calculated adjustment, every minute decision carried the weight of hundreds of lives, yet she remained composed, her training and instincts guiding her through the unthinkable scenario. Outside, the sky was alive with the synchronized power of the jets, engines roaring in perfect harmony, creating a corridor of trust and protection around the vulnerable commercial airliner. The F-22 pilots, without a single word, communicated volumes through their formation, their salutes, and the subtle alignment of their aircraft, a recognition of courage, skill, and command. In that extraordinary moment, amid alarms, creaking metal, and the relentless pull of gravity, Flight 7A became more than a plane. It became a testament to human skill, trust, and courage in the face of near certain disaster. Falcon 91 continued to command the controls, her mind processing aerodynamic variables, weight distribution, and mechanical failure simultaneously, her actions guided by years of experience that demanded split-second decision-making. The co-pilot and captain followed her lead, their trust growing with each precise maneuver. Outside, the F-22s maintained formation flawlessly, a visible reminder that she had not only the technical skill, but the respect and trust of the most elite aviators alive. Their wings dipped again in unison, the salute repeated as if to reaffirm their confidence in her abilities, and in that synchronized motion, the cockpit filled with a sense of purpose and inevitability. She would bring the aircraft home. Every movement she made, every subtle correction of the yoke, every adjustment of throttle and trim, was a symphony of skill and instinct, a dance with gravity and machine, guided by nothing more than experience, precision, and sheer determination. The roar of the F-22 engines outside provided a constant backdrop, almost rhythmic, bolstering her focus and reminding her that she was not alone. The co-pilot, once trembling, now mirrored her confidence, executing each maneuver with care. his fear tempered by her resolve. The captain, still tense, leaned into her authority, silent support blending seamlessly with her command. Above, the stars shone indifferently, oblivious to the extraordinary feats unfolding below their distant light. And through it all, Falcon 91 remained the calm center of the storm, the guiding force in a high-stakes ballet of survival, precision, and trust. The F-22s aligned perfectly, flanking their vulnerable charge, wings dipping in silent salute, were living proof that she had earned respect not by rank or recognition, but by the unmistakable language of skill, courage, and unwavering command. She was Falcon 91, and at that moment she was more than a passenger, she was the hand of fate, steady, decisive, and unyielding, guiding Flight 7A home. The runway stretched out before Flight 7A like a lifeline, the glowing lights cutting through the night like a string of stars guiding them home. Falcon 91's eyes were locked on the distant horizon, the indicators in the cockpit reflecting off her face, a mix of tension, calculation, and absolute focus. Every fiber of her being was attuned to the aircraft, the way it responded to each subtle input, the groan of metal under stress, the vibration of the failing hydraulics that threatened to make even the simplest adjustments catastrophic. The co-pilot, pale and wide-eyed, mirrored her movements, hands trembling but precise, following the rhythm and authority of her commands. The captain watched in awe and quiet relief, aware that survival depended entirely on the woman who had risen from a quiet seat in the back of the plane to become the lifeline of hundreds of lives. The distance between them and the runway shrank with agonizing slowness, the seconds stretching like eternity as Falcon 91 calculated every possible variable, wind speed, weight distribution. Engine response, the alignment of the plane with the center line of the runway, all while keeping the trembling co-pilot steady and aware. Her voice, calm and commanding, cut through the tension like steel. Brace. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was enormous, reverberating throughout the cabin. Passengers instinctively obeyed, their bodies tensing, hands gripping armrests and seatbacks, hearts hammering as adrenaline surged through veins like wildfire. In those moments, fear was universal, but so was trust in the presence of someone who could navigate them through the impossible. The landing gear, long dormant under hydraulic failure, groaned as it made contact with the tarmac, the tires shrieking against the runway surface, a piercing, metallic sound that set teeth on edge, and hearts racing. Metal shrieked and groaned under the strain, the vibrations rattling through the fuselage as the plane skidded precariously, threatening to veer off course with every passing second. Falcon 91's hands moved with practiced precision, tiny adjustments to the yoke, the throttles, and the flaps, each calculated to absorb the violent forces tearing at the aircraft. She could feel the plane shuddering under her touch, like a wild stallion resisting control, but her training, experience, and nerves of steel guided every movement. The co-pilot whispered, almost inaudibly over the roar of the tires and the screaming metal, I think we're going to make it." His words were barely more than breath, trembling with awe, disbelief, and relief. Falcon 91's eyes flicked to him, her glance sharp, commanding, but gentle enough to reassure. "Focus, we're not done yet." Every second stretched unbearably, every heartbeat echoed like a drum in the confined cockpit, yet her calm determination radiated outward, stabilizing the fear and uncertainty that had gripped the cabin for so long. Outside, the F-22 escort jets maintained their formation, their engines roaring like guardians flanking the vulnerable airliner. Their wings dipped again in silent salute, a gesture of recognition and respect for the pilot who had risen from anonymity to become the hand of fate, guiding the lives of hundreds to safety. They had witnessed her skill, her courage, her ability to command not only the aircraft but the respect and trust of all around her. Their presence added a strange sense of security, a reminder that she was not alone in this final, perilous act, yet it was her hands on the yoke, her calculations, and her composure that would determine the outcome, With every fraction of a second, the plane inched closer to the runway threshold, each movement critical, every adjustment the difference between survival and disaster. Falcon 91's focus was total, her mind simultaneously analyzing the mechanical limitations, aerodynamic forces, and psychological states of the passengers, ensuring that each decision minimized panic, maintained stability, and preserved the fragile line between control and catastrophe. Then, as the plane's wheels kissed the tarmac and began to skid across the runway, a collective exhale seemed to ripple through the cabin, though still tinged with fear. Screeching tires, groaning metal, and the smell of burnt rubber filled the air, a harsh reminder of the thin margin between life and death. Falcon 91 countered each jolt, each unpredictable reaction, like a conductor guiding an orchestra with precision, intuition, and absolute authority. The co-pilot's hands were steady now, synchronized with hers, the terror gradually replaced by awe and trust. The captain, silent and focused, provided the critical information needed, a perfect team operating under the extraordinary leadership of a woman who had transformed from just a passenger into a figure of extraordinary competence. Seconds passed like hours, every nerve in the cockpit taut with anticipation, every passenger frozen in a state of fear, hope, and prayer. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the plane slowed, the wheels screeching to a halt, the metallic groan fading into a trembling, echoing silence. The cabin seemed to pause, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if life would continue. Then, slowly, gradually, the collective tension shattered as hundreds of hearts began to beat normally again, gasps of relief, cries, and even tears breaking out among the passengers. Relief, disbelief, and gratitude intertwined as they realized that they had survived an ordeal that could have ended in tragedy. The co-pilot, still pale but now awash with emotion, turned to Falcon 91 and, without thinking, hugged her tightly, whispering with a mixture of awe and gratitude, "You just saved every one of us." The captain nodded silently, eyes glistening, the gravity of the situation finally hitting him, recognizing the magnitude of the heroism he had witnessed firsthand. As the passengers unbuckled and stepped carefully down the aisles, reporters and onlookers rushed to the plane, eager for a story, desperate to understand the identity of the woman who had commanded, controlled, and saved the lives of everyone on board. Flashbulbs popped, microphones were thrust forward, and 100 questions demanded answers. The question that mattered most was simple yet profound: who had performed this act of extraordinary courage? Without hesitation, without any desire for fame or recognition, she simply pointed to her boarding pass. The words were quiet, unassuming, almost dismissive in their simplicity: Passenger 91. The reporters blinked, taken aback, expecting perhaps a famous name, a decorated pilot, or someone of immediate renown. But to them, she was just a passenger, modest, unremarkable at first glance, a quiet individual who had transformed into a savior under unimaginable pressure. Yet to the Air Force pilots watching from above, the story was entirely different. To them, Falcon 91's calm precision, split-second decision making, and commanding presence had marked her unmistakably. They recognized the skill, the training, and the courage in every maneuver she had executed, the kind of expertise that could only belong to someone who had earned their wings through countless hours of rigorous training and testing. To them, she was still Falcon 91, not merely Passenger 91, a hero whose actions had reaffirmed their faith in the values they had trained to uphold: courage, precision, discipline, and unwavering resolve under pressure. The F-22 pilots, their formation now dissolving into the night, carried with them the silent acknowledgement of her mastery, the unspoken respect that only comes from witnessing brilliance in action. In the quiet moments that followed, as passengers disembarked and emergency crews moved in to inspect the aircraft, the significance of what had occurred began to settle in. This was not merely a story of survival, It was a testament to human courage, to the extraordinary potential that lies within ordinary individuals when confronted with impossible circumstances. Falcon 91, now stepping from the cockpit, remained calm, understated, and composed, embodying the paradox of quiet heroism, the ability to perform acts of unimaginable bravery while seeking no recognition, no applause, yet commanding the respect and admiration of all who had witnessed her skill. She had become the embodiment of hope in the face of danger, the anchor in the storm, the pilot whose calm determination had transformed panic into survival. To the passengers, she was a miraculous figure, a savior who had stepped forward when no one else dared. To the Air Force and the elite pilots who had escorted her, she was a legend realized, a peer who had proven that courage, training, and resolve could indeed defy near impossible odds. As the crowd swirled, reporters clamoring, cameras flashing, and questions hurled, Falcon 91 walked calmly down the tarmac, boarding pass in hand, identity unassuming, demeanor composed. She did not smile, she did not boast. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. In that moment, the world was forced to confront a truth both humbling and inspiring, that heroes are not always celebrated, that courage does not always come with recognition, and that sometimes the quietest passengers hold the power to change the course of fate. Passenger 91 had saved them all, yet to those who understood, she would forever remain Falcon 91, steadfast, resolute, and heroic in ways that transcended mere words, a symbol of bravery that would be remembered far beyond the confines of that night, etched forever in the hearts of those who had flown with her, watched her, and lived because of her.